broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello everyone and welcome to this Thursday edition of WilmsFront. It is the 7th of April 2022. We are live on the WilmsFront YouTube, D Live and Odyssey channels, as well as on the interactive entropy software, where you can ask myself, our guest tonight, questions and also send through chats. It is 8:30 p.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria, where once again this city and the whole state are under the most COVID restrictions in the whole of Australia, apart from Western Australia. This week, even Crazy Eyes Michael Gunner in the Northern Territory lifted his vaccine passport system. The NT now joins South Australia, Tasmania, New South Wales and the ACT in having no vaccine passport system and the most minimal of mask mandates. This day next week, Queensland will end its vaccine passport system, but here in Victoria, despite only 12 people in the whole state in ICU with COVID and only 2 on ventilators, the Science TM and Health Advice TM from Chief Health Officer Flatten and his team sees Health Minister Martin Foley continue Victoria's vaccine passport system, vaccine mandates for all essential workers, and plus special mask mandate for primary school children in grades 3 to 6 and retail hospitality workers. Premier Dan Andrews, who easily recovered from his own bout of COVID, says we've got to wait until the Omicron BA2 wave begins to dip before we can relax further restrictions. So I guess it's just maybe 2 weeks to reflatten this latest curve. Dan Andrews has also extended Victoria's pandemic declaration for another 3 months until July the 12th, which means that Health Minister Martin Foley can make new coronavirus rules on a whim. Meanwhile, many nations in Europe have completely dismantled their COVID regulations, even getting rid of the legal requirement for positive cases to isolate for a number of days and have no mask mandates anywhere. Given we have the federal election in May, which will be called by Scott Morrison any day now, and the Victorian state election on November 26 this year, what impact this will have on the future of freedom for Victorians and Melburnians remains to be seen. I will discuss this with my guest tonight, Anthony Lev, who is a member of the Melbourne Freedom Rally movement, which has organised the worldwide Rally for Freedom Melbourne contingent over the past year. And there is also there's been 7 that have happened so far, and there's going to be another one, Worldwide Freedom Rally 8 on May the 21st. Anthony, welcome to WilmsFront.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I thought I'd start our chat by getting you to tell me and the audience a bit about yourself. What was your life like pre-COVID, and why now have you dedicated much of your time to freedom activism?
That's a good question. So basically, I mean, I've considered myself a libertarian for probably over 10 years. And before that, more conservative, growing up in like a liberal voting household. But, I guess I started detaching away from those particular values to a more libertarian view. And yeah, so throughout my 20s, I started my own business, which was booking bands and musicians for events, weddings, corporate functions, all of that, I did that after, studying music at the Victorian College of the Arts, full of lefties, of course. So, it's not unusual for me to be in a situation where I'm surrounded by people who, are vocal about disagreeing with the things I believe in. And, so I I've stood up for my views for a long time, and throughout my 20s, I was building the business and it was doing pretty well. I was able to live off the money, so that's always a good sign. And then I enjoyed things like traveling overseas and just basically running my own life how I wanted to, and just enjoying myself. And then obviously, when these lockdowns started, I just immediately disagreed with it. I was, hanging out with some friends just before they locked down Melbourne. Italy was in lockdown. And, I said to them, if they lock us down, it's going to do a lot more harm than the virus itself. And I still stand by that today. And I guess we're pretty much here. So throughout the lockdowns, I never dreamed they would have, dragged on for 2 years like this. I thought after that initial 6-week, sort of lockdown, ScoMo imposed over Australia, I'm like, oh man, they're going to have to figure out a way to backtrack and say they overreacted. They didn't do that. Daniel Andrews doubled down after the hotel quarantine situation, and then went into this massive lockdown. And I think that's when everybody was energized, but also worried, and because we knew the damage that would be done from such a continued lockdown. And that's when a lot of the people got connected. The freedom movement or the anti-lockdown protests at that time occurred. A lot of the different groups and people popped up, and people found their place, and I guess a community was able to develop in those early days. And now 2 years or a year and a half after those first protests, it's built into this massive movement, not just in Australia, but worldwide pretty much. And over November, we put on, the largest, political rallies in the history of the country, demonstrating that the social proof was on our side, which is fantastic to see after going to, lockdown protests with, 20 people and getting chased by horses. And yeah, I guess now we're here doing what we do.
Yes, I attended it was the November 21. It was Worldwide Rally for Freedom 5, but it was also, it was...
Yeah, 5.
But it was also during the Kill the Bill, Occupy Spring Street movement. And obviously we'd been through 6 lockdowns and come out of that. And then apparently we're going to have this new permanent pandemic management framework in the Public Health Act. And at that November 21, there were estimates of about 500,000. I know that I stood just at the end of the Burke Street Mall. I think it moves on to maybe Queen or King Street. I probably got it wrong, but that's that. You would know
Elizabeth Street's the one. Yeah,
Elizabeth Street. Yes, when turn from Burke Street to Elizabeth Street. Every time I've covered a rally, I've made sure to film the whole procession from the front, and yeah, it just goes on.
It was a big one. Like I remember I was on the stage as the park was filling up, and the park pretty much got to the brim. And then I heard people were telling me that there was still people in Burke Street Mall or even like Parliament. So not everyone even made it to the park. It was just massive. But I think there are multiple factors leading up to that day as well, because we had obviously the Kill the Bill, Occupy Spring Street is the pandemic bill. People were opposed it, but for the first time in a long time, starting at the end of October when we got out of lockdown, the police backed off immediately and allowed these protests to happen. I mean, using the word "allowed's" funny in its own sense, because shouldn't really be up to them or the government. But yes, I think a lot of the people who were disagreeing with lockdowns saw the amount of people coming out, that they weren't getting smashed by the police. And a lot of people thought, got to get down to at least 1 or 2 of these just to, feel like they're a part, be a part of it. And it went massive. So yeah, pandemic bill is a factor, but just I think a lot of people just want to at least demonstrate that, there's a lot of people that were like-minded, and maybe those people didn't realize how many people there were on their side, because every protest we had some big numbers, but we were never able to get huge numbers because of the fear of how the police were going to react and the risks involved. But yeah, crazy time in the history books of Melbourne, and we completely overlooked by the media pretty much, but that's how it is.
At that November 20, that it was just a day after that all gathering limits had been abolished. So there was literally nothing the Victoria Police could do to say that you were violating show directions. But as we saw throughout the 6 lockdowns, and it seemed to be a top-down thing. Dan Andrews' language immediately from late March was, obey the rules. Stay at home means stay at home. We've got these huge fines, and Victoria Police are going to be out in force, making sure that you're only going what is essential to go and that set the tone right from the beginning. It wasn't a public health response; it was a police state response. And Victoria Police, they were pretty much brutal and aggressive with everybody in that second lockdown. Like there were swarms of Victoria Police officers at parks checking. That people they were exercising. They weren't allowed to stop just catch their breath or something, because apparently they weren't. Yeah, and I did notice that in 2021, the Victoria Police, they tended just to leave the people walking around at the park alone, and just focused on the anti-lockdown protesters. And then that's where we saw the even more brutality in that regard, with the rubber bullets, and of course the knocking down and pepper spraying on the ground of that defenseless grandmother.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it stemmed from the ridiculous, initially was the COVID zero strategy, where they had this thing where like, we must have this 0 cases at all costs. Because if it was really a public health initiative to they say reduce the spread, and then eventually became eliminate the spread, we know that the outdoor transmission is very rare, if not.
It's pretty much bogus. I mean, the outdoor masks were the most ridiculous, and they tried to claim that there was playground transmission when they closed the playgrounds, but when they if we're forced to admit they didn't have any evidence, they said, "Oh, we don't need to prove it to like close the playgrounds." It was that type of arrogance.
Exactly. And, even if you just took away the civil liberty approach, just ignore that for a second, and you just look at it from hypothetically a proportionate health response, assuming that, some measures will be successful, but in reducing the spread, but obviously not ignoring the consequences of such decisions and restrictions. And that's where it all starts falling apart, in my opinion, even from a public health perspective, because, outdoor transmission is virtually rare. And the fact they were limiting so much outdoor activity, or stay at home, you're allowed an hour exercise, close the playgrounds, wear your masks outside. What they should have been doing is said, hey, no, look, from day one, we know transmission occurs in family households, in close contact for X amount of time. The safest place to be, or the most risk-free or minimal risk thing you can do, is be outdoors, exercising, mingling outdoors. And at the very least, that would have allowed people to see each other, would have allowed people to get more vitamin D, exercise, on their own accord a bit more. But with a lot of these rules and the 5 kilometer rules, people couldn't see their friends, they couldn't see their families, unless they disobeyed like many of us did. But just take the rules for what they were. It just made no sense in a balanced or proportionate way. And they just went within the police. Just they went to town and were very heavy-handed in their enforcement. And it was just looking back on it, it's hard to believe it happened, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Melburnians and Victorians have tried to block a lot of it from their memory, but we need to say, like, never forget, never again, because like there was such an horrific precedent set. But going back to your point about, well, it's an almost universally accepted point now that outdoor transmission is extremely rare. Professor Greg Dorr of the Kirby Institute, he's one of the good experts, said it's hard to comprehend why we ever had any restrictions on outdoor activity during the pandemic. And Brad Hazzard, the New South Wales health minister, basically admitted, I think towards the tail end of the extended Sydney lockdown, that people at Bondi Beach, it was probably the safest place for them to be. But
Yes, he did say
that was one of the big outrages back in March 2020, that people are at Bondi Beach. And this is the thing, it's like, it was they wanted to close the beaches to send a message that people take this seriously. And there was also this Puritan streak that if people are seen like trying to just live a bit, then that can't be allowed, because fighting the virus must supersede everything else.
Exactly, and it becomes like it's almost like I guess you could call it a virtue signal, where it's like, look, this is what I'm, I'm doing so much to, help everybody out and save lives, and you're sitting there enjoying yourself, and that again stems back to the problem of this, I guess zero COVID strategy, or as you said. So you had the they said it was like a what were the words you used again? Where setting the tone or something, or so people take it more seriously, they'll put these restrictions on. It's the government treating people like children and not like adults, or respecting the liberty of an individual. Because if this from the start, instead of going down the approach of lockdowns and mandates, they should have just given people accurate information, which I still don't believe they've really talked about. The way they record deaths or cases or hospitalizations accurately. There's some blips where they, mention it, but it never really comes out. And if they just had some guidelines of said, these are the things you can do to minimize risk or minimize the spread, and people can voluntarily, implement, these measures in their businesses or just in their personal lives if they choose to. That would be a way, to at least respect the liberty of an individual. And allow people to take control of their own lives and own risk management, because fundamentally you can never eliminate risk in anything. You can only minimize risk, or do things to minimize risk. You can't eliminate it whatsoever. And these politicians went down this hard line approach in the attempt to eliminate risk, which is at all costs, which just makes absolutely no sense.
Only on this one novel virus. They completely excluded every other consideration, health side effects that the lockdowns have caused. And now the evidence is coming out, just especially on children, just how much the lockdowns have stunted their development, particularly young children. I mentioned in my introduction, I can't believe that it's still mandated in Victoria that older primary school kids have to be muzzled. Like it's cruel. And like they're the people who are at least risk from the virus. A school has no greater risk of transmission than an office or a shop. Exactly. It seems to be there's two parts to it. It's basically trying to sort of. It seems to be that children are like putting responsibility on children for the health of everybody else, but also trying to shape them from an early age that wearing a mask all the time is normal. Because there's people who are advocating for, well, there's still a lockdown lobby, lockdown lovers, and also people who want masks forever, and they're known as mask perverts because they just seem to love not breathing properly anymore like they used to do. And it's been proven that cloth and surgical masks hardly keep out any droplet particles, and N95s are only effective if they're properly fitted. And well, it also means that all men would have to shave their beards and moustaches as well.
Exactly.
But again, it's about the mask is a symbol of both obedience and virtue signaling, and that was the point of outdoor masks as well.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And and on my Lev report from Morgan's MCJ report, I've pointed out a couple of times is the Brownstone Institute has a nice article where they've collected over 150 studies that show that mandatory masks, or the surgical and cloth masks, don't do anything to stop the spread. And it's prevalent in all of the data you can see worldwide. You can look at all of the cases explode, after or well after they've had these mask mandates in place, and then you get they try and justify it after the fact. I remember I think it was Brett Sutton's Burnett Institutes did a study, and they tried to claim that the mandatory masks reduced the spread by 30%, which I think they were just trying to pump anything out to justify it in hindsight, when they had no evidence at the time. But it's amusing how
the Burnett Institute, that's Brett Sutton's not associated with it, but it was used by the Victorian government to provide.
I think he used to be associated with it, actually.
Yeah, modelling to underpin Victoria's reopening plan, and the modelling was so wrong with Delta, and even with the huge Omicron cases, it still didn't come close to their model of hospitalizations and ICU. But the head of the Burnett Institute, which is based at Monash University, Brendan Crabb, he's a COVID zero believer, still believing that it maybe can't be eliminated right now, but can in the future. He's part of this Australian COVID zero lobby group called AusSage. It has that Canadian professor in it, Nancy Baxter, who's always spreading her alarm in the media and on Twitter. I got blocked from her on Twitter for liking a tweet that called out her hypocrisy, because she says that wearing masks is not a restriction. It's we all need to do it, and don't engage in non-essential activities. When she actually posted on her profile a photo of herself maskless at the Journalism Quill Awards in Melbourne, embracing Samantha Maiden, the journalist. So she's violating social distancing, hasn't got a mask on. I'm not sure if she had one of those, what is that, CO2 monitors to make sure that the ventilation was, but yeah. I was surprised that she posted that, given how she's so into masks, and like, well, what's she doing at a journalism?
They don't think these people don't think sometimes. It's like with all the G7 meetings where all those politicians, you see them with the photos of having lunch, shaking hands, mingling completely mask free. Then there's a photo up where they're all standing, a couple of meters apart with their masks on, and both of them just get released because they're both being filmed and photographed, and they just, I don't know, like, I wonder what goes through their mind. Like, they would know that people are laughing at them. They don't care, I guess, but they still think they can just get away with it, and they get completely mocked. But it's a bizarre thing. It's really bizarre to observe, and I love observing this stuff. So
people in the chat, they're curious about the origin of your last name, Lev.
Yes, so my last name's actually Levchenko. That's the full last name, which is Ukrainian. I just had it shortened, like, just back on the private Facebook page, because most of my friends just called me like Lev or something, so I just stuck with it. And then you can't really change it once everyone calls you Lev. So it's a Ukrainian last name Levchenko.
So your peoples are at the center of this latest global crisis.
They are, yes. Which is very interesting. I'm not sure what to say. I mean, I think both sides. Russia's not, Putin's not very good. The president of Ukraine's not a very good guy. And once again, you just got a situation like all, I guess, wars and conflicts where, these world leaders and these people in power, and basically playing chess with people's lives. The average person just wants to live free, work, provide for their families, enjoy life. We're not here forever. And these politicians keep, they've got their games and they've got their, issues they just try and sort out at the expense of the population.
Many people have pointed out that Vladimir Putin, by invading Ukraine, he's ended the pandemic, because that's what's dominating the front pages of the online newspapers and the cable news discussions, and we've apparently all got to pay more for petrol and other things now. We've got to sacrifice more for to show solidarity with Ukraine, even though we've spent the last 2 years sacrificing for, well, it's not flattening the curve, because the curve is higher as it has been. But we're told now the strategy was that, well, this is Dan Andrews now, that you only lock down when you don't have vaccines, because most of Victoria is now vaccinated. We don't need to worry about cases anymore.
Yeah, but they still do, in a way, claim to worry about cases, because, wasn't one of the reasons? Yeah, Dan Andrews, he says, just recently he didn't want to remove the vaccine passport like Queensland and Northern Territory did, because he's like, the cases are pretty high. So they still use case numbers to justify their ridiculous rules, and it's madness. But going back to the point of Putin ending the pandemic, it's fascinating to observe behavior and how easily say maybe world leaders, government and media combined can lead people around on a leash, basically, because Russia's not good. I don't really agree with Putin on a lot of things and have done a lot of dodgy stuff, but suddenly this is the biggest thing of all time: Russia invading Ukraine and dropping bombs on Ukraine. Yet the United States and allies have been engaged in regime change and dropping bombs all over the Middle East for decades. And innocent people get caught up in it, but they didn't have the same reaction as the Russia-Ukraine thing. And again, my view is I don't know absolutely everything. I'm this one person, but it's just people just want to live their lives in peace, and it's these world leaders and politicians that keep getting at it with each other at the expense of the average person, whether it's war or whether it's lockdowns or.
And the nerve of our politicians to claim that we stand with Ukraine in solidarity with democracy and freedom, given what they've done to us for the past 2 years. And this is another thing. The West has completely lost the moral high ground. I've noticed that a few of the freedom commentators of activists have said, look at this police brutality by Russia and Ukraine. Sorry, that's Melbourne.
Yeah, it's a good meme, I guess. To make, and I guess memes are a way that our generation communicates. It's and they get right to the point. I love that. I love that stuff. It's
we saw Victoria Police. They've got a new strategy now, which Shane Patton, the Chief Commissioner, has announced. I'll just play the 9 News. Should I call it piece, or more just what is it? PR. PR disguised as a news report.
Vic Pol propaganda through the mainstream news, I guess. Yeah.
Victoria Police is vowing to get back to basics in a bid to rebuild damaged community trust after the pandemic. As Heidi Murphy explains, our top cop says it should mean a much more visible presence on suburban streets.
Police are promising more of this and this in a brand rebuilding exercise.
We're approachable, we're involved, we're working with them and we're here to help.
They call it a neighbourhood policing model.
More often than not, communities know the problems, we know that, but they also know the solutions, and so it's us listening with them.
Our role is not just to make sure people are safe, but that people feel safe, and that's what this model is all about.
The approach to now be used across the state after a trial in 8 areas, including Clayton.
We've had staff report serious assaults and theft, wallets, purses, mobile phones and their possessions stolen from them when they've been walking.
Those thefts down from 20 a week to just 1 a month.
Our staff feel safer specifically walking to and from the station with, knowing that there's been extra resources.
The policing model's also being credited with ending illegal beach parties at Black Rock and slowing dirt bike hooning in Hume.
Visible and proactive and accessible policing.
Police Command is calling this a significant shift designed to reconnect with the community and address local concerns at a local level. They're also hoping to repair a brand damaged by 2 years of unpopular COVID policing.
We know we've had to perform duties and engage with people, and it might not have been what they would have expected in the first instance because of the COVID environment we're in.
Heidi Murphy, 9 News.
I remember Shane Patton during the September week of rage, he reverted to the just following orders defence, though there's certainly as he also said, there's on the previous occasion, there's discretion about how you follow and enforce orders.
Correct. I liked how they first said, the police attending to people being assaulted and theft. And I was thinking, the only people who've assaulted me and stolen from me my life were the police over the last couple of years. But I guess it's back to the question of discretion. I think it's a very good question. They could have, in my view, even with, say, people disobeying 5-kilometre rules or gathering rules, the police could have just said, look, we serve. They make a choice. Do they serve just these arbitrary rules from the government, or are they there to uphold the right, which is what their motto is, of the Victorian people that pay their salary? And they chose not to use discretion. They could have said, look, these people, if they make it to the protest, they're going to vent their frustrations, walk around the street with some signs and yelling some stuff. And we'll stand back and just, allow it to happen, basically, and facilitate it like they should have done, which it would have been appropriate policing in a democratic society, or supposedly liberal Western society as well. But they chose to kettle people in on multiple occasions, get close with people by tackling people and, surrounding individuals. And the actions they did, if there was this supposedly deadly virus on the loose they're trying to prevent the transmission of, their actions demonstrated the opposite, because they needlessly engaged with individuals and increased the risk of a transmission, for lack of a better word, I guess. And it's just they really could have just chosen a different method and allowed the protests to happen, and the risk was low. But they would prefer to beat people up than just have a virus transmit that the absolutely overwhelming majority of people survive.
I think that's the real meaning of "on the beat," which was the headline of that 9 News report. But like you, I'm a libertarian, and there's an old libertarian saying that when I hear the police sirens, I tend to feel anxious. I don't feel secure because the police have a tendency to be overzealous more than reasonable.
Yeah, for sure. And we got to remember, because like police as well, they're human beings, and humans are not perfect. And when humans are granted, power, when one group has the power over another group of people, we've seen what happens with things like the Stanford experiments. Things can go wrong, and I think that was an important like psychological experiment that happened, and you can see it in policing as well. Especially growing up in the nanny state of Victoria and Australia. The police fundamentally should be there to protect rights, or solve crimes, or I say solve crimes because if you do need them, like say someone robs you, intruders in your house, the cops aren't going to get there on time. You're not going to have time to call them, and so they're usually there after the fact. But after the fact, they'll try and facilitate catching the criminal at least and getting some kind of justice. But for a long time, the government has just used the police as revenue raisers to target civilians. Oh, you're not wearing a helmet while wearing your bike. You're not allowed to make that choice. We'll give you a fine. Or, you've gone too many kilometers over the speed limit, even though you weren't actually driving dangerously in a low risk setting. We'll just, give you a fine, even though so yeah, I think this is the policing of the nanny state as well over the last several decades is just it's not an ideal police setting in a civil society, and they shouldn't treat people as potential criminals, which is what I think a lot of people feel when they see the police.
Yes. One thing I was pleased that they actually did post-lockdown was plenty of breathalyzer checkpoints, because as we saw post-lockdown, there was lots of road accidents and drink drivers, and we saw one Victorian politician's career ended by a unbelievable drink driving crash. So like that, there are certainly proper roles for them, as well as solving those most heinous of crimes: murder, rape, aggravated assault, pedophilia. Like, we want the police to do those solve those really dangerous crimes. But with this nanny state stuff, it seems that there tends to be a focus on it because it's easy, and it's easy for police to just roam the streets in 10 during lockdown to check people's masks, whether they're in their 5-kilometer radius.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it also stems from see, the lockdowns themselves were enacted to supposedly, ease the burden off the healthcare system or prepare the healthcare system. So a lot of laws, even before the COVID stuff, the existence of this public health system, or I call it the public health rationing system, a lot of laws are there, and the nanny state laws exist because of this so-called public health system. The government believes that they can restrict your personal behavior to protect the health system. And they've used this excuse to intrude on individual liberties. If we bike helmets, for example, it's like, because if you crash your bike, you'll knock your head and you've got to go to hospital, taking up a bed for somebody else. But it's interesting how this logic only applies, to, I guess, certain things, because you can be an athlete or, highly active playing sport, and, you can put your knee out, you can mess your knee up and you got to use a hospital. But we don't ban sports and all that kind of stuff. So the public health system shouldn't be used as a reason to restrict liberties. We need better ways of, I guess, there are better ways of delivering healthcare as well, but people's liberties must be protected. And obviously, if people engage in risky behavior, perhaps they could obviously maybe have more of a private system where they can pay out of their own pockets, and the government can't use the example of the public health system. Or if it's a public health system, then technically should be open for everybody, regardless of your, personal decision making, because that's what it exists for. But that's a whole big discussion, public and private healthcare and the role of government in health.
We saw through the public health orders that they can take over private hospitals and restrict elective surgery procedures that take place in private hospitals, which is just outrageous. That
Yes.
actually illegal to say perform a operation that may not be urgent but will ease the pain for somebody. That's what we saw with that Code Brown back in January, which of course was based on modeling that was inaccurate. But the public health system is there to serve us. We're not there to be subservient to it. I know that the freedom the freedom protests have often stopped off at the Victoria Police headquarters to you serve us, but it's the same with the public health system. And the mainstream media, they were able to find lots of like nurses and health professionals to basically say we need these restrictions because it makes our job easier. We're overworked. That was the what you'd sort of say guilt trip or justification. These poor overworked health workers. But we're 2 years on now, and so it's no longer an excuse that our health system can't cope, especially with, I listed the statistic, 12 in ICU with COVID, 2 on ventilators. That's a minuscule amount of our health resources. And we've seen with the 000 deadly crisis, 12 dying in just the last 6 months waiting for ambulances. Governments, they're also there to serve us, to make sure that, because we're forced to pay for public health police through our taxes. They're elected to, and over the past 2 years, the default is, apparently restricting civil liberties that'll make things easier.
Yeah, exactly. And it stems back, I guess, the way I see it as well. It's like the Milton Friedman quote where he goes, if you put the government in charge of the Sahara Desert in 5 years, there'll be a shortage of sand. And 'cause even before COVID, I call it the health rationing system because they've always had waiting lists. Every budget, they're like, we're going to pump more money into the health system. Every single politician pretty much runs, or the major parties run their platforms on, especially Labor, funding the healthcare system. And so year on year, they're putting more and more money into the health system, and they still have waiting lists, and all of the same problems exist. And, I like to use the example of grocery stores. Grocery stores, whether it's Coles, Woolworths, your local, independent run grocer, small business, you can walk into the shops, you can buy food. We very rarely have shortages. Usually, if there is a shortage of some particular product, it's because of a supply chain issue. But overall, the average person can walk into the grocery store, afford to feed themselves, and have endless choice of options. But with healthcare, it's like we're stuck in this, draconian system that never evolves. That the government run, where you're on waiting lists. You might not, you can't get the treatment that you need despite having paid for it with your taxes already, supposedly. The private health system obviously works a lot better, but still with private health insurance, it's heavily regulated by the government. A lot of people can't afford it because maybe some people, there would be cheaper options that could be available, but the government's like, no, we have to have X amount of inclusions in the basic plan, and it bumps all of the costs up. So, if you, I say, like, if you put the government in charge of grocery stores where you could walk in and it was free of charge, and you take off whatever you want from the shelf, kind of similar to a hospital where you won't pay because it's public health. There'll be a shortage of groceries and people will be lining up, and you wouldn't be able to get fed.
That's what happened in the Soviet Union, which Ukraine was part of. Currently happening in Venezuela, because when the government interferes with the price rationing system, then it leads to shortages. And what is it? Venezuela was one of the first countries, like way back 10 years ago, to have a toilet paper shortage.
Yep. Exactly, all that money printing and inflation. And then the government, they tried to solve the price increases, their own inflation caused, by putting price caps on everything. And then, I mean, politicians made a mess, absolute mess of that country. It used to be, I think, the wealthiest, South American nation, but it's a basket case now.
Now we're 2 years into what initially was the 2 weeks to flatten the curve. I mean, as Victorians, we're in a freer position than we were, but as we've both said, there's still a lot of unnecessary restrictions. When, like in England, it's completely normal there. There's no vax passports, masks, don't even have to self-isolate if you test positive. And in Scotland, where they've still got masks, vax passes, isolation requirements, they're actually doing worse than England. So what makes Victoria so special that we have a different science TM or health advice TM than the other states and territories? I mean, Brett Sutton here, he's loves masks and ventilation and quarantine. We know that. The state of Queensland seems to have done a complete 180 with their new chief health officer, John Gerard, who took over from Jeanette Young, who became the governor, and he's been talking a lot of sense. The small time that he's been in charge, he took over around Christmas time. His comments when the vaccine passport system, that it was going to be ended by next week. These were his comments.
Lifted, it will be the vaccination that will be protecting us all from this disease. The virus is not going to go away. The virus is not going to go away. You will be exposed to this virus sometime during the course of this year, and it is the vaccine that will protect you. And for adults, that means 3 doses of vaccine, not 2 doses. And if you're in certain groups over the age of 65, or First Nations person over the age of 50, or immunosuppressed, a 4th dose to protect you in the coming months. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to the Minister. Thank you. The level of vaccination in Queensland is very high. The anti-vax group is taking up a disproportionate amount of oxygen. And I think a lot of these mandates have put a lot of stress and demand on a lot of the proprietors of some of these facilities. I know it's put a lot of stress on showgrounds, for example. And I think to do that for the sake of a very small percentage of anti-vaxxers, the public health benefit is marginal.
So he still says the standard public health line on the vaccines, and he has previously said that to develop immunity, there's only 2 ways to get immunity: either get the vaccine or become infected. There's only 2 ways. But the point that he was making about the lifting of the vaccine passport system, that it's just caused unnecessary conflict. And Anastasia Palaszczuk said herself, we're bringing everyone back together. So I know that Mel McPhee, one of the regulars in the chat, she's a Queenslander. I think you can feel secure going into winter with John Gerard at the helm, though his powers have still been extended. But this is the point about these emergency powers continuing, is that, like, although you trust someone like Dr. John Gerard in Queensland to act reasonably, certainly don't hold. We still have a lot of anxiety here in Victoria about what Brett Sutton could advise coming into winter. He's not called Bedwetter Brett.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, I think Melbournians and Victorians will always be a bit on edge because we've copped it the hardest out of all of Australia. Maybe WA is probably second to us now because with their closed borders and situation. And will they bring back restrictions? I mean, they haven't got rid of them all fully yet. And this is the thing that is interesting because not only in Australia, you've had a separate response and different rule settings right now from state to state, but worldwide, you've had places like Texas and Florida were some of the first to get back to normal, and outlaw vax passports, and the sky didn't fall in. We had Sweden that never did a lockdown. They just encouraged people to work from home and gave some advice like we encourage table seating in restaurants, but they pretty much kept open. And obviously the UK right now, they did hard lockdowns. But actually, even with the UK's hard lockdowns, they fared far worse than Sweden, according to the standard COVID stats. Even though neither of them really experienced any unusual overall mortality over the last couple of years. But yeah, UK right now, you can get into the country without the vaccine. You can leave the country without the vaccine. But Australia, they still want you to be double dosed just to leave the country. And then to obviously get in, they want you to have the double dose. And then state to state, the rules are different. So it just comes down to how control freaky-ish each, I think, premier is. And you can probably see, I mean, even in the last 2 years, you can see why we are in the situation we are now in Australia.
We had one of the good senators, Jared Rennick, asked the chief medical officer, Paul Kelly, about the science behind stopping unvaccinated people leaving the country, and this was his response.
Yeah. The rest of the world, recognising, as we've talked already in response to Senator
well, that's not really our
question.
Responsibility. I mean, the rest of the world doesn't have the same requirements. So it's
actually, it is, Senator, because we are signed up to a treaty called the International Health Regulations, and there is a specific component of the Biosecurity Act which addresses that matter about protection for others.
So you're saying that other countries... Yeah, sorry. Are you saying other countries have regulations that stop their unvaccinated people from leaving the country as well?
I'd have to take that on notice as to which other countries might have that, but I understand there are still restrictions in relation to vaccination, both inward and outward travel.
Yeah, I know. That's the question I'm asking you: is why is that restriction, and what's the health? What's the health advice on that?
So I've shared what I can with you, Senator, recognising that's...
So it's not health advice. It's because we signed up to a treaty.
No, there are certain elements within the Biosecurity Act about protection for other countries related to diseases of concern such as COVID-19.
Okay, so can you might put that on notice, like give me the actual sections of the Biosecurity Act? That's right.
So you're saying a sunset on that requirement?
So there's no specific sunset, but the plan with many of these things is to not stop everything at the same time, and so that requirement for incoming and outgoing vaccination. International travel to be vaccinated is remaining for the time being, but not under the emergency powers.
It's a clown show, and it just goes to show. So these chief medical officers, or even at the state level, the chodes, I call them. It's like, are they really independent from the government? Like they're supposed to be, or are they offering health advice, or are they heavily influenced by the politicians that gave them their job? And I think you can see with Paul Kelly right there that he knows he's not the one making the decision there, and he can't even defend it. And he's not providing health advice. He's taking orders from politicians. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, that's why he sort of does take it on notice. What is it? His predecessor, Brendan Murphy, had to take on notice what the definition of a woman was.
Oh, that was that was the funniest thing I've seen. Yeah, and that politician, I can't remember his name, but
Alex Antic. He's one of the good ones as well. So it was Jared Rennick, Alex Antic, Conchita Verivanti-Wells, Sam McMahon, and Matt Canavan were the 5 coalition senators who voted for Pauline Hanson's and vaccine mandates passports bill.
So a few good eggs in a sea of vipers.
So Paul Kelly, again, he's one of the least worst of these health officials, because he's actually said we need to move away from reporting daily COVID deaths and their deaths with COVID, because if someone dies in a car accident or gets murdered with a gun and their corpse tests positive for COVID, that's a COVID death. He is the criteria he's proposing is excess deaths, which is it's sort of a hard metric to explain on this show, but it's basically comparing the deaths that occur when what are projected, because obviously human beings, we all die.
Yes.
I mean, that's they die of all sorts of causes, and a lot just die from old age. That's we haven't mastered immortality yet. That seems to have been forgotten in this pandemic, and that would seem like a more reliable metric. But we certainly need to stop counting cases. Well, let alone, as we've still got the close contact system in place, and the isolation requirements. I mean, before COVID, did they test everyone who came into hospital for, like, what is there? I don't know what the actual how they actually do a flu test, but you don't. People never rat tested themselves for flu in the past. You just know that you have it because you feel like absolute crap for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, and like these are some of the good questions that I mean I've tackled a bit on like my Lev Reports for Morgan's show, where because I'm not a big fan of the metric of excess deaths. I prefer to look at overall mortality adjusted for the population size, because then you can actually see clearly the figures of how many people, say, per 100,000 or whatever metric you're using, but adjusted for population. You can see how many people actually dying and whether there's any unusual amount of mortality occurring. And for what I've seen when when I've looked around from country to country, even I say especially Sweden, Sweden didn't even have one of their 2020, which is the height of the alleged pandemic. Their overall mortality wasn't even like one of the highest of the previous decade. And on top of that, the previous year was a very low death year, so they had a lot of vulnerable people basically ready to go, for lack of a better phrase. And then the metric of how they actually attribute COVID deaths, where you just test positive or even have symptoms sometimes within a month or so of passing away of absolutely any cause, and then COVID's on your death certificate and you get become part of the numbers. So this is why I like to look at overall mortality to get an idea of, the level of death occurring. And it's nothing crazy out of the ordinary. And of course, like if they're doing mass testing like that, they've never tested for a virus or disease on this scale before. So you're going to get a lot of people testing positive, whether they're asymptomatic or just got very mild symptoms, and die of absolutely anything else. And then, was it a death caused solely by COVID? Maybe COVID was a factor, like previously a cold or pneumonia or the flu has been a factor in many people's deaths, especially the elderly, or it was completely unrelated and you just had a motorcycle accident. And then again, the hospital admissions, they go X amount of COVID patients. Well, it's just people who have tested positive. They could be in hospital with a broken leg.
And we had
ICU from a car
accident. Admit that recently, that
they did.
The reason why it looks like there's more children in hospital with COVID, because if they come in with a broken leg, they're tested for COVID.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been looking at this stuff. I was watching this. I was monitoring this stuff from the start. I knew how they were recording it all. I was aware of what was happening in Sweden before that, big lockdown, in Victoria, and before everyone got together. Like I was, like everybody else, you're at home on your computer, debating people on Facebook, going nuts. And I was telling them everything I've been saying now. And back then, they wouldn't believe you. They'd be like, "Oh, it's nonsense," and And then, yeah, I still stand by everything I said back then. I was just looking at both the data and, standing up for, human rights and civil liberties, because I don't believe the government should be able to coerce and exercise this level of power over an individual.
But the sad truth is that, like, we're still a democracy, and the government, they were monitoring the polls all throughout the various lockdowns, and the reason they could get away with it is because the majority of people were complicit in it. There's still so many COVID cultists and crazies, and it was probably summed up by this appalling tweet by Merv Hughes, the former Australian cricketer. He was replying to Dr. Kate Gregovic, who is a geriatrician who's treated elderly COVID patients. So she is on the front line. She is pro-vaccine. She has even had her children vaccinated. So she's hardly an anti-vaxxer cooker, which is the new expression. But this is what Merv Hughes said. And when she was talking about the ridiculous police state response, she was actually replying to that 9 News report. And Merv Hughes said, and if you weren't doing the wrong thing, they wouldn't have to be there. If you don't make the rules, you should follow them, whether you agree with them or not. So if you don't make the rules, is he saying that the people who make the rules don't have to abide by them? I mean, that was happening.
That's an interesting observation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that it's an appalling tweet that we're never meant to question or reflect on if that police state response had any public health benefit, especially what we know now about outdoor transmission. And he followed, because thankfully he was polled upon by people who are like, what the hell are you on about? And he replied to another one of them, said, disagree, Merv, always should revolt against rules that do more harm than good. And he replied again, if you don't make the rules, follow them. It's not hard of a concept.
Yeah. See, the guy's a cock. It's just blindly following arbitrary rules. And okay, my view is that in a supposedly free society or Western liberal democracy, the government should be very small, and their primary role is to protect the rights of the individual, because I find it very hard to justify infringing on an individual's rights. I mean, unless that individual has infringed upon the rights of somebody else, theft, assault, murder, trespass, all the usual kind of things. And I understand maybe most of Australians don't feel that way. So if that's the case, then have open discussions. The government should at least be public about their decisions if they're going to drastically interfere or infringe on people's rights. All these national cabinet meetings behind closed doors, fighting to not have the health advice made public. So if the government can't even be open and transparent in justifying how they're supposedly right to stomp all over you, I mean, to blindly just follow and obey and not even question these rules is absurd. Like, Merv Hughes, you're absolutely absurd.
If he's worried about his health, obviously he could lose a few kilos. And if he's an adherent of masking, sorry, Merv, need to shave the mo to have
it off.
Fitting N95 mask. But 2 years on, I think the reason why we're seeing the politicians back off any talk of tighter restrictions, let alone lockdown, is because the Australian people are finally, they're over it, because we did have a really huge wave with obviously Omicron, which is the most mild variant of COVID-19, and so many people got it, and the people that I knew that got it, both vaxxed and unvaxxed, it was mild for them. Hadron Anti-Bullying asked me, did I get COVID? I think I did, but I didn't test positive on the rat. And we know that the rats are unreliable, so are the PCR tests. So, I mean, I'm glad the penny has finally dropped, and what is that? We've got all the politicians now getting COVID. Dan just had COVID. Brad Hazard, got COVID. The New South Wales Health Minister, he was probably the worst up there. And what is that? There's the meme going around now. Say the line. I got COVID, but thankfully I'm triple jabbed, or it would have been worse. Yay!
Hilarious. Oh man, I love it. And yeah, I mean, I got it. It must have been like, I think towards the end of November. I didn't do tests or anything. It was probably Delta strain or something. It was before Omicron came around. But I had other people who I knew that were around me got tested. They were positive. All the symptoms were the same. I'm unvaxxed. And all these people now I know who are testing positive, getting symptoms and feeling unwell, who are vaxxed. I mean, I've said, I remember interviewed by Paul Dowsley back at a protest at Greg Hunt's office in February. I said, you know, I think the vaccine has more risks to me than COVID-19 or along those lines. It turns out I made the right decision. I mean, but for me, fundamentally, the number one reason for not taking it is I'm not going to let the government tell me what to do. I mean, they're trying to pressure me to do it. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. Even if it hypothetically was 100% safe, hypothetically, I still wouldn't do it. I'd be like, get stuffed. And then number two is the risk benefit of it all. But yeah, I mean, I'm not pro or anti. It's just like, I'm not against its existence. It's just, I think people should be free to make the choice, and they shouldn't be coerced. There shouldn't be mandates. If you want it, okay, it's there, have it. But now they're 3 or 4 shots into it, 5 coming up. I think it's a pretty average product to begin with. And a friend of mine got the Pfizer ones, got pericarditis now. Other people, I know people, friends of friends too, getting issues with a lot of it. And it's just like, yeah, if the government said these are the risks of COVID, these are the risks of the vaccine, here's the benefits, so people could make up their mind with no coercion, that's fine. But they went down, the tyrannical approach of just, continuing to destroy people's livelihoods because they made the wrong choice according to these, crackhead central planners.
Well, I'm double dosed with AstraZeneca. I made my own sort of judgment risk call. Like I could get really crook with COVID, or I could get really crook with the vaccine. And the reason I took AstraZeneca is because it was the most demonized vaccine by the like COVID hysterics. They all wanted people to take the Pfizer mRNA, and so like I'm like, well, if they're like demonizing this vaccine and promoting the Pfizer, then I should probably do the opposite of what they suggest when it comes to the vaccine. And it's now been revealed that the Pfizer vaccine has had the most amount of side effects with the pericarditis.
Myocarditis.
I know people who've had that as well. And we've seen the Pfizer documents finally unsealed. There's talk now because, well, not even the flu jab prevents the flu. It just prevents severe disease, which is what these vaccines do. Like they're especially beneficial in old people, but forcing injecting an 18-year-old who like that's where the people were denied their own risk benefit judgment. Now there's talk of like second generation vaccines, which they hope it can be what they call sterilizing vaccines, which actually prevent transmission. Remember, these vaccines were sold as preventing transmission. So
that's what they all initially said. Yep.
Yeah, so these second generation vaccines, that's what they're calling them. I guess it's going to be like video game consoles now. There's second generation PlayStations and
Yeah.
Nintendos. It's going to be like this with COVID vaccines.
Yeah, they're just going to keep, I guess, pumping him out, and how many they mandate, who knows? We'll see what happens. But yeah, like an interesting point what you said about the benefit or the cost or the risk benefit. I mean, I've told people as well, like obviously COVID, if you look at the data, even from the very beginning, pretty much people with multiple comorbidities over the age of maybe 70 or something, there's a heightened risk from COVID more so than standard influenza. So look, maybe there is an argument to be made that the vaccine could be more beneficial, obviously, and beneficial for them outweighing the potential risks of the vaccine compared to just getting COVID. But yeah, in my view, under 50, that is when it becomes very questionable, because the data shows that COVID's far less problematic for people like under 50. Compared to influenza and pneumonia, especially like teenagers, they shouldn't be having this. But again, it just fundamentally comes down to personal choice. If you want it, if you believe it's in your best interest, go for it. I mean, I'm not here to tell people what they shouldn't do. And for me, I just knew, like, I eat well, I keep in shape. I'm like, well, I trust my own body, and that's just, I'm not going to, just don't see a need for it. I haven't got a flu shot either. I had the flu probably 10 years ago. That was definitely worse than what COVID was.
2019, it was horrendous, but I've still never had the flu jab. I have no intention of getting the COVID booster because, I probably had COVID, so I've got that.
Better immunity as well, yeah,
and I suspect that's why Victoria's ICU numbers and ventilation are so low, because obviously the Victorian government, their aim was COVID zero, but it's had the worst outcomes on everything. So natural immunity is a byproduct of that. But we've also seen first Clive Palmer, who's unvaccinated, old fat guy,
old Clivey,
with just antivirals, including hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. George Christensen, who's a bit younger, 43, but still fat guy. He's
not very in shape either.
He was able to get better just with ivermectin, and I noticed that they're haters on social media, like they got the usual thing like, haha, like, hope you die. But like when they recover, it's like, that's not supposed to happen. They're both fat, unvaccinated people. They were meant to die, and they shouldn't have been saved by horse paste.
Yeah, and this whole thing has stemmed from the politicization of the health response. Instead of just being, the government providing advice and being open about what could treat COVID, a lot of studies that do support ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, but the politicians and the media made it very political, and it's like we've got one side versus the other. You've got the lockdowns and vaccine side versus like the supposedly anti-vax, anti-lockdown, pro horse paste ingestors, and one side was demonized, and the whole thing's become political. And like everything else that's political, people love to berate and ridicule the other side because it makes them feel good. I guess it might be human nature, picking sides, but it maybe also stems from the fact that people just can't respect other people's decisions, or it's a proper, maybe a victim of a circumstance of a propaganda campaign. But politics does this. It's a divisive thing.
It's also because there has increasingly developed this totalitarian streak in the far left, and so that PR guy account was telling people to report traitors to Crime Stoppers who are thinking of supporting anti-lockdown protesters. And the account still maintained that anyone who disagreed with Dan and Brett's strategy or undermine it were traitors. And we're still seeing some people in Australia cheer on what's happening in Shanghai in China, because China is Omicron destroys any COVID zero strategy, and so they are repeatedly testing 26 million of the Shanghai residents, locking them in their apartments if there's a positive case, killing their pets, separating children from their parents if they test positive, sending them to those quarantine facilities, which, well, their quarantine camps, they make ours look like a 5-star resort. But there's people in the comments, probably the worst sensationalized social media COVID account is BNO Newsroom. And they always report like China has this amount of cases, by far the biggest on record. And there's people in the reply who say, wow, it looks like China really cares about their people.
Yeah.
And it's like forcefully locking people, like repeatedly locking them in their home, like so they can't get food, can't get their medicines, separating people. That's okay with you? That's apparently shows the government cares.
Yeah,
I mean, we came close to, like, we had a level 4 lockdown here. That's more like a level 5 there.
Yeah, well, this is the interesting thing, actually. So China, obviously, was the first, place to enact lockdowns in the Hubei province. They never imposed nationwide lockdowns, and they supposedly eliminated the virus, got it under control through just locking down a particular region,
which was get to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and then this lockdown model was then adopted and promoted by the World Health Organization, which Italy then was the first Western nation to lock down, which had advisors from the Chinese Communist Party advising them on their COVID response too. So I followed the work of Michael P. Singer early on with all of this, and the view seems to be that China enacted these initial lockdowns as a propaganda tool to get the West to basically destroy their own economies, which I think is very interesting, because they're trying to say that eliminated the virus. A population like China, very population dense, no nationwide lockdowns, they supposedly eliminated it through this lockdown, export that policy via the World Health Organization. But then now they're doing a lockdown of Shanghai again. So I'm trying to wonder, there's lockdowns happening. I've seen people post about it. There was a good, I wouldn't say good, it was a Twitter thread of a guy in his family couldn't get food for about 10 or 12 days and just managed to survive, and it was a very difficult time. So they're going on this lockdown rampage again in Shanghai, trying to supposedly eliminate the virus, but I'm not convinced they ever eliminated it. So my question is, why are they doing this lockdown in Shanghai only? Is there something else that Xi Jinping's whipping up?
Well, they have got an open COVID zero policy, and apparently that's going to continue until 2023 when Xi Jinping wants another term. But the reason why these localized lockdowns are so cruel and inhumane is because the officials that were running Wuhan, Hubei, they got executed, and so I don't think that the people that run Shanghai want that happen to them. But I know that's a suspicion that there could be some variant, but I think that's trying to make excuses for China, like that. Oh, the reason they can't get back to zero is because there's some new variant or something, because they can always get down to zero because they're so good. Again, this warped, twisted thinking. Ed Hyman says the latest strains are brought to us by Ford, BA1, BA2, and XE. So BA1 was the original Omicron, and BA2 was the son of Omicron. And there's all these, there's all these variants, this is the table that's put up by, I'm not sure if you've heard of Tom Peacock, who's a virologist at the Imperial College of London. He's sort of the main guy.
Oh, yeah, good old Imperial College, Neil
Yeah,
Ferguson.
he's basically the one that sort of calls if a variant's going to be a thing or not. So these are all the recombinants that are going around. So apparently XD is the most concerning one in his opinion. I'm not sure if it's on that graph there, but yeah, they're talking mainly about XE, which is, what is it? It's a BA1 and BA2. So what is it? It's a recombinant of Omicron and the son of Omicron. Does that mean it's an incestuous mutation? But yes, I know that the media and the COVID forever people, they're desperate for some new variant. I mean, there's a Deltacron story nearly every week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they love to cling to it. They it's, I guess it's similar to the climate change, the hardcore climate change advocates, where they feel like there's this impending doom, and they can somehow contribute their part to solving that problem or preventing the impending doom, whether it's wearing a face mask or riding a bicycle in the other camp. And they get a sense of, a sense of doing something good out of it. And but at the same time, though, the people who don't agree with them and don't do what they want, they're quite nasty towards.
The mainstream media, they're obviously pleased that the pandemic has helped increase their ratings and clicks, because they were on their last legs, and so they
love it.
want
Yeah,
another crisis. I mean, they covered extensively those Japanese encephalitis deaths. We haven't heard of a death recently, which
it's kind of, I think it's going to be quiet. Like, I don't.
Well, that's because the wet La Nina is over, but again, it's because where the precedent's been set that if there's a new virus in town, you need ridiculous public health measures. So it's sort of like, are we going to be forced to wear beekeeper outfits when we go out? Like that's what you sort of fear. But like, it's a virus that's been around for like 500 years, but the thing was, it never been found this far south, and so it was blamed on climate change.
Of course, yeah.
But yes, that's passed as well. Now, obviously, we have the federal election will be called by Scott Morrison any day now for a Saturday in May. And then we've got the state election in November. There are pro-freedom options at the federal level. There's United Australia, Liberal Democrats, One Nation, and the Great Australian Party.
And the independent Senate candidate Morgan C. Jonas. got to shield that guy.
And also independent Senate candidate Damien Richardson of Cafe Lockyer as well.
Yes, he's running as well.
Though they're only running in Victoria. So we obviously, people in other states, there may be independents running there. But as far as I know, the pro-freedom minor parties should be running in every state and territory. What do I know the polls are pointing to a federal Labor win and a state Labor win. What do you think is going to happen? I'm not going to ask you to think who will win, but what do you think will happen after the federal election, after the state election?
Good question. So I think federal election, it's probably hard to say whether ScoMo or Albo will win. I think it's a good possibility of if the United Australia Party gets some seats, then there might be possibly a hung parliament, but getting seats is very difficult. So I personally think the best bet is voting for people like the Liberal Democrats in the Senate. So if the freedom parties such as the Liberal Democrats can have a balance of power in the Senate, or with potentially other freedom parties, they can stifle bad legislation. If the government wants to pass something, they'll be like, no, we won't. You shall not pass, and it'll stop them from doing bad things. I think that I think getting balance of power in the Senate is probably the best realistically we could achieve in this time frame, which it may not be enough to get the government to move in the right direction and pass good legislation, but at least it might stop things from potentially getting worse. Or potentially they might be able to do deals with other, potentially the Liberal Party to get some maybe freedom, a bit more freedom back.
Obviously, the same should be said for the Victorian state election, because Dan was able to get his pandemic extensions thanks to the three stooges. But
hopefully they get voted out. Hopefully,
yeah. And with the pandemic management bill with Adam Somniak putting a spanner in the works. I know that Rod Barton is now on that poster of traitors, but he actually got rid of the aggravated pandemic offence from the final bill, which would have seen people imprisoned if they committed an aggravated public health offence. So that was actually something, a really good improvement on the bill. And the Three Stooges, they did get the fines halved as well. So I mean, even with so these four combined, they did make it a less crappy bill.
I guess a small amount of credit, a very minuscule amount of credit. They could have not voted for it in the first place.
I know.
Yeah. But moving forward, an interesting thing as well is because the last several elections, the major parties have been getting less of a share of the votes. And there was recent polling that came out that confirmed that, again, their overall share is declining. Obviously, it's very difficult to get a premier or prime minister that's not Liberal or Labor. It's very, very difficult at this stage. Just because the stranglehold and just the general popularity they have amongst the average person, most people still think Liberal or Labor. But things for the last several elections have been moving in a better direction, which I think will be accelerated at these elections. So I can just hope that the freedom parties get a good chunk of the Senate, or what it's called I think upper house in Victoria in the state. Legislative Council. Yeah, that's the one. But yeah, the federal elections obviously coming up first. That will be very interesting. Obviously, the results in the South Australia election weren't fantastic. I didn't see the actual percentage of share of votes they got, but South Australia hasn't gone through as much of a tyranny as Victoria. So
and the Labor leader that is now Premier, Peter Malinauskas, he is actually so far proving himself to be better than the Liberal Stephen Marshmallow, as he was known. He moved quickly to make sure that Nicola Spurrier and Grant Stevens, the public health officer and police commissioner, respectively, their power was removed, and that it was going to be made by the government. And he has got the isolation protocols into line with the rest of the states, and he said should be getting rid of the masks next Thursday. So hopefully he'll follow his word by that. But he's from the Labor right. He's actually quite conservative. While in Victoria, Dan Andrews from the hard socialist left.
The socialist faction.
Yeah, and obviously is quite a fan of the CCP as well, which is why he followed their lockdown playbook to a T. Albo, his team obviously has a lot of CCP apologists in it, like Penny Wong and Christina Keneally. I'm not sure if you saw this, but there's a secret plan to save him from COVID, not because he'll get sick, but because he'll have to isolate for 7 days. And so this was Labor has strict protocols for journalists who will join them on the trail. To get on board the Elbow bus, you have to be triple vaccinated, wear an N95 in most settings, take a rapid antigen test every 3 days. Anyone who tests positive is off the bus. The rules for Morrison bus are less strict. Essentially, it's follow the rules of the state and territory that you're in, because Morrison obviously already had COVID. Maybe Elbow should have just deliberately infected himself maybe earlier this year so he'd get that natural immunity during the campaign.
It's paranoid hypochondria. I mean, they get their vaccines, they're still wearing their masks, get tested all the time. Just stop testing yourselves and then it'll pretty much go away, you know?
And N95s, they're described as like the beak mask or the sandwich wrapper mask.
They look ridiculous. They look ridiculous. You see people wearing them because people are still wearing them at the shops, and it's
and they're still the mask perverts outside wearing them alone outdoors and alone in a car.
Yeah, well, it's where I walk, where I live, when I walk my dog, and I remember during the lockdowns walking the dog, I didn't wear a mask. And she would wear a mask, and if she saw me, she would like dart across the road, because she's like, oh, I've got to avoid COVID. I still see her now wearing a mask, and I just walked past her house. I didn't know where she lived, but I walked past with my dog, and she's just leaving a driveway with her dog, and she quickly stops. She's like, oh, and I'm just like, I'm just gonna keep walking. Some people are just very, very like living in fear, and they
still believe that like the mask is the only thing that's keeping them alive. The most ridiculous mask wearing that I saw was a cyclist who was not only wearing a mask while cycling, but also wearing the magpie spike helmet, even though it wasn't magpie nesting season. And where I live, the magpies are friendly because they're always around people. So you might have just seen like a magpie around previously and decided to wear the spike helmet as well.
It's just fascinating observing behavior, and there's been plenty of it to observe recently.
Yes, breathing. Yes, there's. I've seen the double masks as well. I haven't seen a triple one.
Oh,
got to stop that breathing.
Yeah, and it's like, look, if people want to wear their masks, look, they can wear their masks. And like I've said all along, if people want to wear a hazmat suit down the street, they can. But I'll
still laugh at them.
Yeah,
there's actually
been
a few that have worn gas masks to the supermarket because
amazing.
They're so much more dangerous because a lot of people stopped wearing masks. So wearing gas masks now. I mean. Like I snicker to myself when I see the double mask, but I think if I saw the gas mask, I couldn't control my laughter. Like, you're free to wear it, but I'll still mock you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, very, very funny. Like, it's just, like if people tried to explain a couple of years ago what was going to happen, you'd be like, nah.
Well, it's been fantastic to chat with you tonight, Anthony. It's actually the first time that we've had an in-depth discussion because the rallies are always so busy. You're emceeing, and that's probably why we've been chatting for so long. But I think we've covered the current state of things, and we'll see what happens. We never know what's going to happen, and we never say never. But I'll plug the next. It's not a rally; it's a freedom party, which they're just as enjoyable. These social events. So I'll allow you to promote it.
Yeah, it's just an event for like-minded freedom people who have been protesting or want to make new friends if you haven't met people yet. Harrison loves going to these things. You'd have seen Harrison at the rallies.
He's been on this
what he loves to do. I went to a lot of these during lockdown, especially yeah, great place to meet people and mingle with fellow like-minded individuals.
And Worldwide Freedom Rally 8, May 21st, that actually could be the federal election day. It's probably either going to be May 14th or 21st, but
Yeah,
we'll
could
know.
be.
We'll know soon enough. But yeah, I mean, it'll still, it's as the Melbourne Freedom Rally channel says, March will never be cancelled. So if it's on election day, I mean, it's the perfect day to be vigilant.
Yeah, exactly. And I think these worldwide rallies, like every 2 months, it's just a good show of global support, because it all came out of the COVID lockdowns, and the building freedom movement globally. So I think it is good to keep these worldwide ones up for 2 months, because even after this COVID tyranny comes to an end, governments are going to keep doing what they normally do, passing more laws, passing more regulations, centralizing, control and surveillance over our lives. And but man, there's really no easy solution to solve these, to push back against these politicians. Like, is it political? Is it through mass non-compliance? But
Well,
some shift has to change.
the saying is the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and there hasn't been enough vigilance. And I know that the last one I went to, attendance has dropped, and that's because things are a bit more normal. I know that Cam Wilson and Crikey recently wrote a really bitchy article called "Australia's Anti-Vaccine Movement is Collapsing," and or I called it a bitchy article because made some really bitchy comments about Monica Schmidt's appearance in a recent video.
Yeah, and that guy, these photos, he's a bit of a soy boy, that guy,
But the reason the freedom movement will go away if there's freedom. I mean, it only exists to advocate for freedom. I mean, if there's freedom, then of course there's going to be less people.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's difficult to maintain regular massive, events or massive attendance, because, the way I've seen it, we've already, especially over that November period, going into December, we demonstrated the social proof that people are on our side. We've put on the biggest political rallies in the history of the country. If the politicians don't listen, that's on them. But we can't, I guess, let our guards down, because, sure, the COVID narrative will eventually end one day. Hopefully the mandates go, this will be a thing of the past one day. But the last several decades, the government's been increasing in size, increasing in power, over-regulating, over-taxing, doing terrible things. Now they're printing money into an oblivion, causing prices to rise. People are just generally becoming poorer because of this. They're flooding the economies with fiat currency, not just in Australia, but pretty much worldwide. And it could be some difficult times ahead, and we need to just, like I said, be vigilant, and
also
make sure keep them on notice.
Never, and also say never forget never again, because the real history of the horrors that have happened the past 2 years, they need to be remembered, so the next generation know. You hope that in 20-30 years they read back and say, how could this have happened? There's another famous cartoon where a person in a mask and a face shield is reading the history of World War II and says, but how could they just all comply? And obviously the irony being that history repeats itself. And so like what has happened in the past, the horror of this period needs to be remembered. And we live in an age where there's smartphones and everything, so it can be repeated for the next generation to show just how horrid this time was.
Yeah, exactly. And like, if you look at all of human history, it's always been a battle between basically freedom and like tyranny or authoritarianism. Like, most of human history has been under some kind of level of oppression, whether it's just kings or governments, and it's always going to be a battle for as long as humans are around. It's never going to get to a point where you're like, yep, we're going to be free like this for the rest of humanity. It's always a cycle, and it's always a constant battle. And are we entering a period where we're going to be much less free for a while than what we were? Hopefully not. But I mean, ever since something like, say, September 11, 2001, the government's gone into overdrive, taking away liberties. And now we're heading into this bio-fascist surveillance state.
I think we are beginning to win now. I mean, as I mentioned, the Australian public is much wiser now, and the COVID extremist cultists are losing credibility, and well, they're also just being mocked. Like I also noticed a lot of comments underneath the Shanghai lockdown saying, "Oh, look how COVID zero is going," with the with the what is it? The emoji when they're pulling the stupid face. So definitely the comments are much more disparaging when it comes to severe restrictions now.
Yeah, for sure. And so hopefully lessons learned going into the future. And I am generally like an optimist, and I do believe people, even in the face of, say, increasing government restrictions, are innovative to basically force the government's hand in particular directions. Obviously, we're seeing, the topic I like to talk about, central banking in fiat currency and the printing of, but with, cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in particular. It's a new industry and a new technology that's being spawned that were created by, free individuals and, people basically pushing back against this central banking system. And it's a lot of governments now are being forced to pass, I guess, friendly regulation towards crypto. They're not trying to ban it. They're trying to keep it around. Central banks are going to start loading up on Bitcoin and potentially other coins. El Salvador's made it legal tender. So it's basically, individuals still through innovation can force the hand of government to favor things in the direction of liberty and individual autonomy, which crypto could be just one thing. And I'm curious as what people will create next that will force the hand of government to favor liberty, because they know they can't defeat it. That's another aspect. So the solutions aren't always solely political. It can be just through innovation of free people creating cool things that improve our lives.
We could do a whole other show on the destruction that central banking does, and how we should have stuck with the gold standard, and cryptocurrencies are a new way to guard your wealth. But we'll leave it at that. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'll hopefully see you at Worldwide Freedom Rally 8 or sooner.
Definitely will, man. Thanks for having me.
All the best. All right, everybody. That's the WilmsFront show for this Thursday evening. Now, there is going to be another WilmsFront on Monday evening. I've got joining me Professor Augusto Zimmerman, who has just published a book called Deconstructing ScoMo, which it's basically a whole book about, to summarize it, elaborating on Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells's speech on ScoMo in the Senate, calling him a fake Christian and a fake conservative. So I look very much forward to going in deep with Augusto with that, because he is not a shill for any side of politics. He's a principled Christian and conservative. So again, there'll be no Tim's News Explosion Monday, but I'll still bring you up to date with the latest news, and hopefully by Monday the election will be called. Tomorrow night, Trad Tasman talk with Due de Boer back at the normal time, 6 p.m. Melbourne time on the Unshackled YouTube channel. New Zealand is now at their, orange alert level now, and they've got rid of the vaccine mandates, and their Director General of Public Health, Ashley Bloomfield, is resigning as well. So a lot to catch up with Due on. And obviously, there'll be a lot more in Australia to cover tomorrow night as well. So I'll see you then on Friday for Trad Tasman talk. Keep checking out the unshackled.net for our Unshackled Productions archive and our articles. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the unshackled.net to view all our shows and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.